Hey everyone, and welcome back. You guys sent in a ton of stuff on communication skills. So it looks like we're going to be diving deep into how to level up how we talk to each other.
Yeah, we're going to cover a bunch, from active listening and nonverbal cues.
One study said that pausing for a few seconds can change how a negotiation goes.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much we don't realize about communication. Most people think they're good at it, but everyone can improve.
And it's more than just being a good speaker.
It's way more. It's about listening and connection with your audience, too.
Okay, let's jump into it. The first source is all about active listening. I'm a big interrupter myself. But this article says it's super important to really engage with whoever is talking.
Right, it's not just waiting for your turn to speak.
Exactly.
It's about making the speaker feel heard. Have you ever been in a conversation where you could feel the other person's attention?
Definitely. It makes you feel so much more comfortable opening up.
It's the difference between hearing and truly listening.
This article even mentions that negotiators who take a 3-second pause before responding are way more likely to reach a deal that works for both sides.
Because that silence gives both people time to process everything.
And shows respect.
Which builds trust.
Yeah.
This source suggests trying a pure listening experiment where you don't even think about your response while the other person is talking.
Wow, that sounds hard.
It is! It's harder than you'd think, but it can show you a lot about how you listen.
Yeah, I know. I've been in meetings where I completely tune out and just start planning what I'm going to say.
We've all been there.
Okay, next up, this source is about clarity and conciseness.
Two key parts of good communication.
It's about being clear and efficient.
Exactly. Think about getting a super long email that's not clear. You just end up confused.
And it wastes everyone's time.
And it can make you seem less credible.
One thing that stood out to me was using less jargon. I'm so guilty of that.
We all are. It's easy to forget that other people might not know all the technical terms we use every day.
Right. Like if you were explaining something to your grandma.
Exactly.
This source also suggests summarizing complex ideas in just a couple of sentences. That's a good skill to have, right?
Being concise is super valuable.
Yeah.
If you can't sum up your message quickly, people will tune out.
Okay, let's move on to the nonverbal stuff. All the stuff we communicate without even realizing it.
This is where it gets interesting. Remember how more than half of communication is nonverbal?
Yeah.
Well, this source breaks it all down, from eye contact to posture.
I fidget a lot when I'm nervous. Is that bad?
Not necessarily. It's just about being aware of how your body language might affect other people.
So I should stop bouncing my leg in meetings.
Probably. It's about using your body language to strengthen your message.
Okay, let's get into some specifics. What about eye contact?
That one's tricky. You want to show you're interested, but not make the other person feel uncomfortable. One study found that making eye contact for about 60% of the conversation is the sweet spot.
60%. I'm going to have to pay attention to that.
Most people aren't even aware of how much eye contact they make.
Okay, what about posture? I've heard that crossing your arms is bad.
It can make you seem defensive or closed off.
So I should sit up straight and lean in a little.
That usually shows you're engaged and paying attention.
What about gestures? I talk with my hands a lot.
That's fine, just don't overdo it. You don't want to be distracting.
So I should just be aware of how much I'm using my hands.
Exactly.
We've talked about eye contact and posture and gestures. What about facial expressions?
Our faces can say a lot without us realizing it. We've all been in situations where we're thinking one thing, but our face is showing something else.
Like when someone tells a bad joke.
Exactly. But when it's important to be authentic, your facial expressions should match what you're saying.
This is all pretty mind-blowing. I never thought this much about how I communicate.
Most people don't, but it's important stuff.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of the more technical stuff. But what about the emotional side of communication?
That's where empathy comes in.
Which is what this next source is all about.
Exactly. It dives into how empathy can build trust and make you a better communicator overall.
And it's more than just saying, I understand, right?
Way more. It's about actually stepping into the other person's shoes and seeing the world from their point of view.
This source says that practicing empathy can actually help us become better communicators in every area of our lives.
Which makes sense when you think about it. When you can understand where someone else is coming from, you can communicate more effectively.
I can see how that would be helpful in difficult conversations.
Absolutely. When you lead with empathy, you're less likely to get defensive or jump to conclusions. You're more likely to listen and ask questions.
So it's about really trying to understand the other person's perspective.
Even if you don't agree with them.
This source gives some tips for practicing empathy. One is to pay attention to the emotions behind the words. Sometimes people say one thing, but their tone of voice or body language says something else.
That's why it's so important to pay attention to all the cues. Someone might say they're fine, but their face might tell a different story.
So it's about reading between the lines.
And when you think someone might be feeling something different from what they're saying, it's important to acknowledge those feelings.
Like if a coworker says they're not upset about missing a promotion, but you can tell they are.
You could say something like, I understand this must be disappointing.
Just acknowledging their feelings can go a long way.
It shows that you're paying attention and that you care.
I think people are sometimes afraid to validate someone's feelings because they think it means they agree with them.
But that's not true. You can validate someone's feelings without agreeing with their actions.
That makes sense. I've definitely been in situations where I've jumped in with advice before really listening to how the other person was feeling.
Sometimes people just need to be heard.
And that's where empathy comes in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Such a powerful tool for communication.
This has been amazing. I'm already seeing communication in a completely new way.
That's a whole new world.
But I think we should give you, the listener, some time to process all this. We'll be back in a bit to talk more about empathy and what we can learn from it.
And we're back. Still swimming in this sea of communication tips. You guys sent in so much good stuff.
It is a lot. We've already talked about how important it is to listen and be clear, and how our body language plays a huge role.
And now we're going to jump into this source on empathy, which honestly just might be the key to better communication in every part of your life.
But before we do that, I was thinking, you know how much we rely on texting and email these days?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do you think that's making us worse at communicating face-to-face? Like, are we losing those in-person skills?
I think it's definitely a risk. Technology is amazing for staying connected, but it also makes it easy to avoid real in-depth conversations.
Like, we're so used to firing off quick messages that we forget how to really listen and respond thoughtfully.
Exactly, and that's where empathy comes in. This source says that when you practice empathy, you actually become a better communicator overall.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When you can understand where the other person is coming from, it's easier to find the right words.
And the right tone, and the right approach. It's about getting out of your own head and seeing things from their perspective.
Even if you don't agree with them.
Even then, empathy isn't about agreeing, it's about understanding.
So how do we actually get better at this?
This source has some good advice, like paying attention to the emotions behind the words.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes people say one thing, but their tone of voice or body language says something totally different.
Exactly. It's like when your friend says they're fine, but you can tell they're actually upset.
So we have to pay attention to those subtle cues.
And when we sense those unspoken emotions, it's important to acknowledge them.
This source gives a good example. Like if a coworker says they're not bothered by a missed promotion, but you can tell they are.
Instead of just saying, oh, okay, you could say something like, I understand this might be disappointing.
Just acknowledging their feelings can make a big difference.
It shows you're paying attention and that you care, and it can open the door for a more honest conversation.
I think a lot of people avoid doing that because they're worried it means they agree.
But you can validate someone's feelings without agreeing with their actions.
That's a good point. It's like saying, I hear you, without necessarily saying, I agree with you.
Exactly.
I know I've been guilty of jumping in with advice before really taking the time to understand how the other person is feeling.
We've all done that. It's easy to get caught up in trying to fix things.
But sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen and let the person know you understand.
That's where empathy comes in. It's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to see the world from their perspective.
This source breaks down empathy into different types, like cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy.
Right. Cognitive empathy is about understanding the other person's thoughts and reasoning. Emotional empathy is about feeling their emotions. And compassionate empathy is about feeling concern for them and wanting to help.
So cognitive empathy is like, I get why you think that way. Emotional empathy is like, I feel your pain. And compassionate empathy is like, I want to help you through this.
That's a good way to put it. And all three types are important for effective communication.
Okay, so we know empathy is important, but how do we actually get better at it?
Well, the first step is just being aware of it, paying attention to how other people are feeling, and trying to see things from their perspective.
This source also suggests asking open-ended questions.
Instead of asking, are you upset? You could ask, how are you feeling about this?
Which gives them more space to express themselves.
Exactly. And another good tip is to practice perspective taking. Actually try to imagine yourself in the other person's shoes.
Even if it's hard.
Even then,
It's a powerful way to build empathy.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see how empathy is woven into every aspect of communication.
It really is. And the more we practice it, the more fulfilling our relationships become. But I think it's time for another break, so you, the listener, can absorb all this amazing information. We'll be back soon to wrap up this deep dive and talk about how to put all of this into practice. Okay, we're back. And wow, we covered a lot in this deep dive into communication. You guys really sent in some thought-provoking stuff.
We did. It's been great to break it all down with you
Mhm.
and see how it all fits together.
So as we wrap things up, what are the biggest things you want listeners to remember?
Well, I think the most important thing is that communication is a skill, like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get.
It's easy to think that some people are just naturally good at communicating.
Right, like they were born with some magical gift.
But the truth is, everyone can learn and improve.
Absolutely. And that leads to my second point,
Mm.
which is being intentional about how you communicate.
Like thinking about your message, your audience, and what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. It's not just about talking. It's about communicating effectively.
And that brings us to our third key takeaway, which is the importance of empathy.
Empathy is really at the heart of good communication. It's about understanding and connecting with the other person.
It's not just about getting your point across. It's about building relationships and fostering understanding.
Exactly. And when you approach communication with empathy, it can make such a difference in your personal and professional life.
One of the sources we look at described communication as the art of understanding and being understood.
That's perfect. It's about making an effort to understand others and expressing yourself in a way that others can understand.
And remember, every interaction is a chance to practice these skills.
Whether you're talking to your boss, your partner, or you're a barista.
Every conversation is an opportunity to connect and grow.
So go out there and communicate with confidence, with intention, and with empathy.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you, our amazing listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into communication.
We hope you learned some valuable skills and that you feel inspired to keep practicing and keep growing.
Remember, effective...
Keep learning, keep connecting, and keep those conversations flowing.
Until next time, happy communicating.